I went into this coffee shop, and up on the screen, they were showing body bags coming back from the war. And then it went to soldiers who were in the hospital and were injured. One soldier was getting a prosthesis. And at that moment, I just kind of flipped out for a few minutes. Everything was swirling around. And then all these people were just getting their coffee and just talking. In our whole country, no one's paying any attention, and these young men are getting killed.
Hey, this is Frank Schaeffer. We are watching and or listening to In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer. And today my guest is Patrick Smithwick. Did I say it right, Patrick?
That's correct.
And Patrick is the author of a number of books, including Racing with My Father, Flying Change, Racing Time, and the new book, War's Over, Come Home, which I got an advance copy of, which I can hold up here. An advance copy here. I don't know, is this going to be the cover, Patrick?
I have the actual book. I just got some advanced books.
Okay, well, we've got the same cover anyway. I got it in the advance bound manuscript form.
That's the same cover.
A while back. So let me cut to the chase here, and then we will get into this. You know, you've written on a whole number of subjects that Racing My Father, Flying Change, Racing Time. You have an association with people who have raced horses and done all these other things, but we're not going to really talk about that today. Let me just start by saying that as the father of a Marine myself, who did 2 tours in Afghanistan and 1 in Iraq,
Wow.
In reading your book, I had 2 very personal reactions aside from the book. One was a real case of what I guess people call survivor's guilt, because my son came home, and while he suffered some debilitating effects of being at war, the fact that your son has had such a horrible experience of PTSD and put you through that, which was always one of my worst fears, as well as, say, being badly injured or killed. And the fact that I haven't experienced that means that I come to this book, you know, with a sense of gratitude that this didn't happen to me, and at the same time, you know, why would this happen to Patrick and not to me? And a real guilty sense that people call survivor's guilt. That's the first thing. And I don't know, you know, I'm just sharing that with you up front. Then the second thing, of course, is that up to the point where you, in a sense, have not lost your son, but lost him to this PTSD experience, and the fact that he's become a homeless person and all the rest of that, you know, to say that I empathize I can't, because that didn't happen to me. But the fear of the potential loss, the night times I spent not sleeping, the fear I had every time I heard the postman's van on my gravel driveway, wondering if it was a van with 2 Marines in dress blues come to tell me that I'd lost my son. You know, I haven't, as it were, been to the funeral, but I've been up to the point of the loss. And so I don't know how many people will read your book that will get it on that level, but I certainly do. And then the third thing I just want to say is about the book. It's a tremendous book. And it's such a hard read in the sense of it's so truthful and raw about the loss that it addresses many things at once. And I noticed that somebody at the back of the book, in some of the Richard Dresser or one of the people who have given it the glowing reviews they had, said that, of course, it's about more than simply your son's PTSD. It also gets into the whole subject of homelessness, mental health, the way we don't deal with these things. So I'll be honest with you, I do a lot of interviews on my podcast. I have no clue where to start on this one, because it's had such a big emotional reaction with me. I don't even know where to begin. I feel less prepared for this interview than ever, and I've just read your book.
Well, I
don't know what to say. So in a weird way, I'm going to throw it back at you and just say, hey, Patrick, let's talk about this book, because I don't know where to start.
I was moved by your comment on when your son was in Iraq and or Afghanistan, and wondering when the black van was going to come driving in your driveway. And
yeah,
that was the most surreal experience, wasn't it? Having your son at war, and then everyone in this country just sort of going about their normal day. And that struck me, it reminded me of a section in the book where I'm a teacher, and I was on my way to this wonderful school, and I stopped to get a cup of coffee on the way during the Iraq War, and Andrew was over there, and it was his second tour. And I'll get upset talking about it, but I went into this coffee shop, and up on the screen, they were showing body bags coming back from the war, and then it went to soldiers who were in the hospital and were injured and were getting one soldier was getting a prosthesis, and I just, at that moment, I just kind of flipped out for a few minutes. I was just, everything was swirling around, and because I knew Andrew was over there, and then all these people are just getting their coffee and just talking. In our whole country, no one's paying any attention, and these young men are getting killed. And so during the war, I know what you mean. That was a very difficult time. And then for us, that was such a raw time, talking to his, sister. And one time we talked to him on the phone. I don't know if you talked when your son was there. When Andrew first went, it was very old fashioned that we talked on the phone, and there was this lag time of almost at least 5 seconds. And he called on his birthday. It was called on his birthday, and he said he was going up to the northern border, and he just wanted to tell us that he loved us. And you could tell that he was thinking he might not make it back. And so those were so visceral and so extreme, those emotions. Then when your son gets back, and my son gets back, and he's doing all right, and then he starts getting a little paranoid, and then he's schizophrenic, and he starts having these hallucinations, and he gets very angry, and things unravel. That's a whole different kind of pain dealing with that, because it's so amorphous. You can't just get your hands around it. That was a mouthful. What do you think?
No, it's exactly on the nose. And one of the things I was struck by, just you've given me a place to start, was my own experience as a Marine parent. My son volunteered right out of high school in 1999, and this was before 9/11. So, for him, this was just a big lark, and it was going to, he wanted a little more discipline in his life, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, the drill instructors tell you, the Marines are always the first sent, and prepare for this to be serious. And we're exchanging letters from boot camp. But of course, when 9/11 actually happened, and my wife Jeannie and I were like every other American watching those towers going down, I knew it instantly, that this is going to happen. And then sure enough, a year and a half later, he was in Afghanistan, did 2 tours there, and then a brief one in Iraq. But all I want to say is that, I was part of the frivolous American mob that doesn't take the fact that we are citizens seriously, and it is cost-free, and we're just consumers. Before the towers went down, 10 seconds after that, I've never been the same since. I had a son at war, and I was part of the people in that coffee shop with you, looking at that screen, wondering if that was my son, not arm's length. And the way I would describe it is I live in the higher education worshiping, Volvo driving Northeast. And all my friends and neighbors, nobody got this. Whereas, I had a Marine bumper sticker on my car after my son joined, and I'm not a big gung-ho anything. I never served. I never pretend to be. I'm left of center on a lot of issues. But all of a sudden, the guy changing my oil, who also had a kid in the Marines, and a waitress over at the local diner where I'd have breakfast sometimes, these suddenly became my family.
Yes.
And my attitude towards some of my swanky friends, with money and position in the upper middle class, was basically the hell with you. And there was a period of time when I was quite angry with my own class of Americans who had nobody in there. And if my son hadn't wanted to do this post-high school little adventure, none of my kids were serving. I'm not a former military person. I didn't have a handle on this. And all I can say is that it changed my life forever, in the sense that I kind of look at what goes on in this country from the point of view of a kind of continuation of that experience of yours in the diner. I see what we do as serious. And of course, if the war backfires, or we lose, or people are killed for no reason, this does not strike me as, well, that's just the way things are. I'm pretty serious about who we elect and all this other stuff, in an almost desperate sense of empathy for, say, the parent today that now has a kid down at Paris Island or, at MCRD San Diego, wherever it might be. And I just want to ask you, I know this isn't on the topic of your book and his PTSD, but where are you today, just as a military parent, having gone through this whole thing, in terms of just looking around at America? I'm not fishing for anything. This is not an ideologically loaded question. It's just father to father. Where are you at today? And I can talk about where I'm at. I'm just curious because I finished this book and my first question was, I wonder where Patrick's at right now, just as a human being having gone through all this. How do you see our country? How do you see yourself? How do you see the rest of your family? How has this changed you?
This is was especially in the last 6 months, and I'm getting so much feedback from people, and I'm very interested in all the different programs that work with vets that have returned with mental trauma and with PTSD, and I've been really amazed in the last few months how many really good programs there are and how many people are unselfishly giving themselves to these programs. Many of the people have full-time occupations, like you mentioned a dresser who has a testimonial on the back of my book. He is a full-time writer and a playwright and has a novel out, and he's organized this whole program of writing for soldiers. And then I've discovered just recently there are programs for acting for soldiers, and the Theater of War project is incredible, where they bring Greek tragedies to military bases and have the soldiers watch these Greek tragedies, because this shell shock or PTSD has been going on for thousands of years, and the Greeks knew how to deal with it. They were at war at one point for about 80 years with Sparta, and they would bring their soldiers together, thousands of them, in a huge amphitheater. And the general might have written the play, and then the soldiers would have a catharsis watching the play. I'm also interested in EAT, equine assisted therapy, especially through the Man of War project at Columbia University. So I've actually been encouraged in many ways, and I think our country is learning. And just the other day, I was looking around for some information, and I saw that the VA is planning on trying to find housing for 30, I think it said 38,000 veterans, and they're trying in the next couple of years to find housing for them. So when you go where we were out on the street and you see them lying in the, on the sidewalk and in the gutter or out in the woods in a tent, it certainly is horrible. But I think our country is trying to do something about it. But I also do think it's almost just an entire disconnect to look out and to see how many homeless people there are, over 600,000, and over 60,000 of them are veterans. Mm. And my last note on that, it's so sad that a high percentage of those veterans are from your and my generation, from Vietnam. I think it's 47% of them are. So they're getting older and they're still out on the sidewalk. They're 70 years old and they've been suffering since Vietnam. So I hope and I think our country is trying to do something about this. And I'm interested in many of these programs.
Yeah, of course, there's such a long history of this, just not in the States, but in the United Kingdom, for instance, after the First World War. But after all their imperial wars, they had the same phenomena. And so much literature came out of these sort of waves of forgotten generations. Right. There's the whole patriotic gung-ho at the beginning of the conflict. By the end of it, our men and women come limping home, as it were, and nobody wants to know. I guess it doesn't make it any better that the British did the same thing. And of course, the rise of Hitler's Germany, the Weimar Republic, a lot of this came out of their own forgotten generation of military people who were treated so badly and left behind in their own economy. It never ends well when you don't thank the people who went to bat for you and kind of don't want to even see them. And of course, we see that very much with our homeless people today. Let me just fast forward and describe a little bit for people watching this. My guest is Patrick Smithwick, And he has written this incredible book, War's Over, Come Home, which I received an advance copy of a few weeks ago. His son, Andrew, suffered from horrendous PTSD and a lot of mental health issues. Let me check on one thing. Has there been anything new about the situation since I got this book in terms of Andrew's, what's happening with him? If you just want to bring me personally up to date a little bit, and then let me describe the book to my listeners.
The book has a touch of suspense. Are we ever going to find Andrew or not? And it ends in but it comes right up to date, but it ends at a point where we really don't know where he is, but we have a feeling that he's in the Southwest, and we still think he's in the Southwest, and he's living as a survivalist homeless person. He gets a small disability check, and we tried for quite a while to find out where he's getting those, probably an ATM machine. And so he's a survivalist. He lives up in the mountains, we think, and then he hikes down to the rivers, depending on what season it is. And once in a while we receive someone will send us a picture. It'll be a hazy kind of photograph, and once in a while a fairly good one, and we think it's him. And pushing a bicycle loaded down with all kinds of gear. And that's his life. The last time we saw him was in 2018, and he was hiking about 13 miles a day from the foothills above Albuquerque down to the Rio Grande. And then he actually, we saw many people. We stopped at 7-Elevens and places like that along his route, and Pancake House. He used to like the Pancake House, but and they all mentioned that they liked when he came in there. And we trailed him in 2018. They mentioned because they were often threatened by people, and they're worried about being robbed. And he came in, and it made him feel safe. As a matter of fact, there's this one place, and a woman told me that these tough guys pulled up in a pickup truck, and they had these subwoofers on, and the whole truck was boom, boom, boom with this music. And one guy was in the truck, and two came in, and the poor little woman thought they might want to rob the place. And Andrew, she said, came in, and he said, "Those are really nice subwoofers you have. Mind if you turn them down a little bit?" And the two guys got in the truck and left. But since 2018, we really haven't been able to track him down, although we receive an occasional posting. And
in the book, there's all these pictures of these sightings. And of course, at the end of your book, which I presume is in the finished book, there's this picture of Andrew when he was 5 years old. And of course, it's a terrific photograph anyway, but I just want to share that because
it's so nice you share that, because we were split on whether to use that for the cover or not. For quite a while, I wanted that for the cover, because when I'm looking at it right now, I can, you know how it is, I can feel his body, and I took that picture, and I can feel picking him up just, 10 seconds after taking that picture. That's on Chincoteague Island. And a wonderful weekend we had, a wonderful few days we had there with my wife and my two sons. And Andrew used to love running on the beach, as you can see.
Yeah, and looking at that picture, and then of course all the pictures in the book of the various sightings of him, sort of places where he was last seen, et cetera, et cetera. And then of course I love this here, this little note he wrote to you, basically at about the same time. Which I thought it was so beautiful that you were sharing those moments of his childhood, and reminding us that not only, and I tear up too thinking about this, not only is this the same person, but every time you see somebody lying face down in a gutter who's homeless, they've got a father somewhere or a parent. And
Right.
I have notes like this from my children and grandchildren. They're the prized possessions of my life. And of course, your hope for your kids and your hope for grandchildren is that they will be safe. I mean, isn't that the most basic prayer? When my son was in combat, I just felt this terrific sense of being lost, as in your whole instinct as a parent. You were talking about feeling the body of this child and how you picked them up a moment ago, because it's just a moment ago that it happened. And then, you know, here you are, they're at war and you can't do anything for them. So all your role as a protector is stripped away, and it's the most naked and vulnerable I've ever felt. And for you, because he's come home, as it were, so severely injured and disabled from this war with the PTSD, you know, that stripping away of being the protector, and you know, where you are now is trying to find him and get news of him. And I just feel it's so brave of you to write such a book like this about that experience. And it must, I don't think it's been cathartic for you, because there's no catharsis in this, but it's certainly of service to others. Right. Because it changes the way we see things. You know, I'll give you a little example and then I'm going to shut up. But I remember reading an article in the New Yorker a few years ago that I've shared before here on this podcast, and my producer will know what story I'm telling. But it's funny, you know how you have moments in your life and you're a little different afterwards. And it was an article on people who had attempted suicide and failed, having done a big attempt, like jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge, and 1 in 1,000 survives. And they had an interview with a man who had actually jumped off the Golden Gate, saying, I walked all the way from my apartment in San Francisco down to the Golden Gate. It was about 45 minutes. And I said to myself, if one person makes eye contact with me and asks me how I am, I won't jump. And then he did jump. And I, you know, for the 20 years since I read that interview, I've never passed anyone on the street without asking them how they are. I mean, it's become like a Christian makes a cross. It just changed the way you see things. I tell this story because your book has changed the way I forever will see people who are homeless now. This is a watershed experience for me, because of course I identify so keenly. And it's not that I've been insensitive and mean-spirited before, but I'm part of that whole throng to whom there's a whole class of people in America who are invisible. And I admit that. Right. And it'll never happen again.
I feel very much like that after one of the early chapters going to Seattle, looking for Andrew was very unique for me, because first of all, I went all by myself, and usually my wife we go to the airport, she figures out where to go and everything, and organizes things in the hotel. And there I was in Seattle. That was his Memorial Weekend, looking for Andrew. And I was for about 4 or 5 days, and I developed a circuit that I walked around, because we heard in the general area where he was. So I got to know the homeless people. I'd see them twice a day, every day at least. And I got to, you know, talking to them and realize they're individuals, and that this was their life, and that they had a schedule, and when they would come and set up. And I'll never forget this one guy was a Vietnam veteran, sort of smallish, handsome man. And he was in a wheelchair. And even on the hottest days in Seattle by the waterfront, he had a blanket over his legs. And I was walking by him, and I gave him I put some money in his jar or whatever, and he bent over and the blanket fell off and he had no legs. And that's where I realized what he was doing. But he wasn't there to show everyone, I have no legs, give me money. He just, all he had was Vietnam vet, and was receiving money.
You know, one of the, I guess moving may be the wrong words, because it wasn't moving in that sense, but one of the scenes in the book that made my blood run cold, and there are many, was the one where these interactions you have with law enforcement, where you think he's in a room and they're keeping you from going in, and then you realize they've moved him out. Discuss that scene a little bit, but also just discuss this sort of warp and woof of your encounters with law enforcement, how you have been treated, and the homeless problem, what they're dealing with. And that scene in particular, where they're not letting you in a room, in a way, pretending he's still there. What they're really doing is moving him somewhere else. At least you feel that is going on. Can you talk about that scene in the book as an entry point to just your interactions with law enforcement, homelessness, you as a father tracking down your vet son? Here are other people in uniforms who have also volunteered to serve, and yet suddenly they become sometimes very problematic in the way they're dealing with you. and maybe other homeless people or people with mental health issues? I know that's a huge subject. I've asked too many questions there, but please dive
In general, in general, the police have been extremely helpful. And I'll give you plenty of examples of that. In the scene you're talking about, when they do that sort of thing, they just there was a policeman there, and they stressed that your son has his rights. And to talk specifically about that scene, we had everything super organized. We had a judge sign off on that. What we were doing is we were getting a special department of the Albuquerque police that was set up to do this sort of thing. And they would, and then we had detectives, and we followed Andrew, and we tried to, and they gently sort of apprehended him, and they brought him to the hospital, and the administrators at the hospital and the psychiatrist said they would keep him there for at least one night, and that we'd be able to meet with him, and then we could start to treat him. But what happened was Andrew got there and he raised holy hell. And my son and I were outside we sort of went up into the hospital, and we're outside these big doors, and we wanted to get in. And so I told the psychologist came out, and I said, well, I'm coming in. As soon as I said that, these two policemen were in front of us, and they sort of got in their football stance, and I could see that my son and I probably weren't going to get through them in too good a shape. And so it's a very tense scene, but they were doing what they were trained. And actually those policemen did an incredible job every time. Then what happened was they had sort of smuggled him outside, and we figured that out. So my son and I ran downstairs, and then the rest of the family, his sister and his mother, was downstairs, and everyone was crying, and Andrew was cussing out the police. And the police were good. They were very gentle. I tried to force my way in once or twice, and he just held me by the bicep and pulled me back, and he said, your son has his rights. I'm sorry, sir. This is the way it is. But it's so frustrating, because then, as you mentioned, this has happened to us 3 or 4 times.
Yeah.
He talked his way out, and they put him in the back of a car, and they drive him wherever he wants to go, and then they let him off. So our country we have a free country, and there's this super stress on HIPAA right now. And so you can't force someone to go into treatment. And the VA did a really good job with Andrew. Once he was in for about 10 days in the VA hospital, and he was getting better and better. But then when he thought he was getting better, then one day he just walked out. And you can't force him to stay in there. So it's a very fine line. And many of the police, we had a detective here in Baltimore that was incredible. And his brother, actually, Lawler, was killed in the war, as a veteran who died. And Lawler would call me up and text me and help me try to find Andrew. And one time we had Andrew, so he was picked up in Seattle in a park. So we were really worried about him. He had been attacked and been attacked and had to go to the hospital. And anyway, the police picked him up in this park where he'd slept, and he wasn't allowed to be in there. So he was in a jail, and we thought, well, this is great that the police would send him back to Maryland, but it all fell through, and the police in Seattle released him. So it's more the bureaucracy of the whole situation. The individual policemen, many of them who were Marine vets, were very understanding, although they didn't do it all what we wanted. One time, you're talking about, we had him right here. I'm in my farm in Maryland right now, where I write, my writing room, and we had him just a mile down the road. And we had an EMT, the fire department came, all these policemen came kind of by accident. They all heard about it, and there are dozens and dozens, 30 cars all backed up, and Andrew just flipped me over his shoulder. And we were just trying to keep him here in Maryland. But finally, they said he has his rights. They told his mother, she tried to talk to him, that he has his rights, and they put him in, they patted him down like in the movies, and then they put him in a car, and I saw him drive off, and they took him wherever he wanted to go in the county. And that's our legal system in the United States. It's not any individual policeman's fault. And many policemen, as a matter of fact, we know a retired policeman, retired officer in New Mexico, who has occasionally seen him and sent us pictures. So
I have a question for you apropos of that. This is In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer, and my guest today is Patrick Smithwick, and he's the author of many very powerful books. But War's Over, Come Home, the story of Andrew and how he lost Andrew to a very severe case of PTSD and homelessness. It's an incredibly moving book. And I can honestly say, as the parent of a Marine, as much impact as anything I've read by anyone who's associated with that experience. I want to turn the page here a little bit to a question which I think you're very well suited to address from a personal point of view. And unwittingly, you've segued into it by these stories about your interaction with the police and the legal system. It seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, but from the reading I've done, it seems to me that you have a confluence of really an unfortunate series of events coming out of the 1970s and the 1980s, where the ACLU and other supposedly liberal civil libertarian organizations worked very, very hard to make sure that people could not be committed without their consent and would be released from all sorts of psychiatric units across the country. And now we have this vast homeless problem. And of course, a lot of people on the left blame the capitalist system or the uncaring government or this, that, or the other thing. I'm 70 years old. I happen to have been around when there was tremendous controversy as the ACLU and these other civil libertarian liberal organizations worked to make sure that when Andrew says he doesn't feel like being restrained, he has his rights. And if he walks away and is terribly harmed or injured, too bad, he has his civil rights. I know there are other countries that handle this better than we do. America's a nation of extremes, always. I mean, that's who we are. We're just crazy. Either everyone is out and no one can be restrained. Repeat offenders, 80 arrests. They're still pushing people off in front of subway trains, whatever. It's an absurdity. Our country is so absurd compared to the way other people handle this. But how do you feel about the balance here in terms of the kind of civil libertarian extreme or the libertarian wing of American politics combining with the liberal effort to, as it were, make sure no one is in any kind of getting psychiatric care in any involuntary way, unless it can be proved that they're dangerous to other people and it goes into the criminal justice system. And then, of course, lock people up, throw away the key, the kind of 19th century approach to mental health where you don't really treat them, they just disappear. Obviously, we have the balance wrong, and every tent city on every sidewalk in any city warm enough to live on proves it. The left made a terrible mistake in the 60s and the 70s. It was a ridiculous idea that you just pretend that people's civil liberties trump necessary care. You've experienced the worst end of this. I am not fishing for an answer. I don't have one. I'm asking you, what do you think about it?
Well, that's so interesting. It was interesting for us to talk to the police after we had this highly emotional time with Andrew in Albuquerque, and the family was crying and he was yelling at the police, and it was the most horrible scene. I originally wrote the whole thing in verse because I couldn't write it in sentences. And then my editor said, we gotta put this in the sentence format. And I just had nothing but images, crushed glass, yelling. I was kneeling in front of my son, and he was in handcuffs right in front of me. And he had his head down, and he didn't really want to look me in the eye. And I wanted so much just to touch him, but I didn't do it because I didn't think it'd be fair, because he had his hands in handcuffs behind him. But after they, and my wife and my daughter were talking to the police, and please don't take him away. Please keep him here. And finally, when they took him away, and then we talked to the police about it, and this was a special, really good unit of the police where they were trained to do it without using any violence. And they were doing a really good job keeping us all calm. And they told us these stories of finding people being brought in who had just been, like, as you said, on the edge of jumping off a bridge, and someone had grabbed them and pulled them back, or someone had walked into a room and there they were with a gun, and they, kicked the gun out of their hand and brought them to the hospital. And they told us these stories about 4 or 5 examples. Well, no, they told us 2 examples where the person was brought to the hospital and due to their rights was released, and then within the next 48 hours committed suicide. So I think that's an example of what you're talking about. And perhaps if they could have stayed and calmed down, they might still be with us today. And of course, suicide is a huge problem with veterans, as you know.
Yeah.
High number commit suicide every day.
Yeah, it seems like our ideas about personal liberty and in so many areas, and our rights have an impact on lives that are not what was intended by the activists that, for instance, opened the doors of so many psychiatric units and basically said, these people have been abused. And of course, there was a lot of abuse with some of the overuse of shock treatment and so forth. It's not that the other system was perfect, but we have the whirlwind we're now in the midst of has certainly not worked. And someone needs to think about this.
Oh, here's another quick example I'd like to give. In Seattle, where we knew that he had been in a fight, sounded like with quite a few people, had attacked him, and he had defended himself. And I went to the hospital, and he had just been released 2 days before. And I asked the guy there, I said, "Well, can you tell me what kind of shape he is in when he left? It's my son. I've flown all the way from Maryland to Seattle, and I'm trying to find my son. I just want to know what kind of shape he's in because it could help me find him."
Yeah.
And this guy just stonewalled me and wouldn't give me any information. And I was just about to jump over the counter, and I knew he was looking on the screen at the information. So finally he said, he picked up the phone and he said, "There's someone out here pushing the HIPAA." And that's his job. And so this guy came out and sort of ushered me out. But then when I went outside, as you remember from that scene, I met this wonderful policeman that was a federal policeman at the VA and had been in Iraq. And he told me that he had seen Andrew leave. He asked me for a flyer. He asked me for my phone number. And he said he would do anything to give me information on Andrew if he saw him. So you have individuals who want to help. But as you said, you have this bureaucracy that holds people back.
What do you think, just off the top of your head, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you could wave a magic wand, how would we change the system so that we could help people like Andrew against their will long enough to get them back on their meds again, but at the same time have some sense of individual with mental health problems have rights, but also understand that those rights are curtailed by a responsibility to the whole community, as in people in New York City pushing someone under a subway train while they are in the midst of a bad time, and then being who have had multiple encounters with the police and so forth. It just seems to me that we are at a kind of a dead end on this with homelessness and the rest of it. We cannot go on as we are and claim to have any compassion. It seems to me that the libertarian people on the liberal wing of things have got to back down and say, look, we made a mistake. This was not the way to do this. By deinstitutionalizing everyone, we've just simply put them in tent cities on the street, to be rough about it. But on the other hand, we're not a police state either. I don't understand what the solution is within the way our laws are structured, but shouldn't there be some humility here from the left and right and just saying this is intolerable? We have to get together, if on nothing else, to discuss this issue. How do you see that?
Well, I think you're right. Some compromises can be made. And for instance, with the VA has this ambition to try to get almost 50% of the homeless vets into housing, but it just takes incredible manpower and imagination and money also, I imagine, for people to go out and to find the vets and to calmly tell the vet, we have a place for you to stay. Yeah. But the thing is, many of the homeless don't trust the system, and they don't want to be in some place where they're told what to do or how to live and what time to be there. So I think it just takes some manpower to go out and you have to talk to the homeless individually and try to find them a place to stay. That way they can try to get their lives back together. But I don't have any magic cure-all for it. Although when I think of the vets in particular, it seems like, for instance, it seems like it definitely could be done, because when many of the vets have veteran on their hat,
Yes.
or they have a backpack, or they have army boots on, or you can kind of tell who the veterans are, or they have Vietnam vet. And if they could be talked to and just gradually taken off the street, and they could pull their lives back together. But I don't think there's any way you can force them to take any certain kind of meds or that sort of thing.
Well, without changing the law, that's for sure. There'd have to be a rollback of some of those what were regarded as enlightened advances at the time, but that have not turned out. Let me just turn the page here a second. This is Frank Schaeffer in Conversation with Frank Schaeffer. If you want other people to hear this podcast, please like it in the online sense of telling people about it and share it. We are going to be sharing the information about Patrick's book. Anywhere this podcast is shown, it will be shared. You will be able to get the book. You'll be able to order his other books. And if Patrick will be talking to our producer, Ernie, about any links he wants to his organization or anybody else's organizations, anything you want, Patrick will be promoted along with this everywhere, just letting people know that. One thing I didn't get into, because I'm not, I'm in the business of interviewing you, not myself here, but just in terms of deep background, I co-wrote a book called AWOL with Kathy Roth-Duquet, who's CEO of the Blue Star Families. Her husband was a Marine officer, actually headed up the Osprey development program, the not fixed wing mixture helicopter airplane, whatever. And my son was in the Marine Corps, and I'm a writer. And of course, a lot of my books come out of my life experience. I wrote a book that called Keeping Faith, a father-son story about love in the United States Marine Corps. Got invited to a lot of Marine events after that because people liked it who were Marine families. And another book called Faith of Our Sons about my experience as a wartime parent. So that my own writing experience is similar to yours. That said, what you have gone through here is on a exponentially different level than anything I have been through, as I said at the beginning of the introduction. And so what I want to tell people about Wars Over, Come Home is that I think this book does two things, amongst others. It's a very well-written book. It's a tremendous insight into parenthood, period. This is a father who has done everything for a son over and beyond anything that you can imagine as a parent. I am a parent. I'm a parent and grandparent. This is over and beyond anything that I can imagine. This is the most, you talk about extremes, but this isn't extreme parenting in the best sense of the word. You've gone the distance plus some, then some more. And that's what this book is about. It sets a very high and wonderful bar in terms of family togetherness, the way you and your wife and family have come together on this. But it's also this terrific insight into the homelessness and mental health issues. I would imagine that if Congress ever gets it together enough to have some hearings on the mental health issue and maybe the reinstitutionalization of people for their own good, at least to give an opportunity to families and psychiatrists to get someone on their meds again, you're the kind of person that I would imagine would show up at those hearings and have a lot of insight for them. Which brings me to my question, what, aside from the people who have loved the book that have given you blurbs and recommendations, who are, a sort of a who's who of people, Henry Taylor and Dresser and others, what has the reaction been to your journey in terms of the Marine Corps family that invited me to their birthday parties and all these other things? Gold Star moms, Blue Star moms would invite me to their sessions to speak as an author because of my book, Keeping Faith. How has that family embraced this story, but also your family? Because I can remember when my son was at war, the emails I was getting, because it was pre-text times in those days, but the emails I would get from Marine Corps moms from Idaho or California or Alaska, meant so much to me. that Marine Corps family must be a big part, have been a big part. And you're talking about the police officers you've met who are former Marines who've reached out to you and are taking the photograph around trying to find your son or the flyer or whatever. Just talk about that Marine Corps family experience embracing you and how that has played out.
Well, that has really been, there have been very many positive, really positive outcomes of the book. And the one was the especially Marine veterans and policemen who were Marine veterans. And the other is just people were so helpful. The homeless people themselves were incredibly helpful, and especially the veterans were helpful. And when I was first working on the book and I had a first draft or two, I knew some Marine veterans, and I knew a couple from the Vietnam War. And I'll never forget, I gave one of the manuscripts for like how you have it was bound. It was an early edition. It was 450 pages.
Mm-hmm.
And his name is Jerry Valerio. He's not with us anymore. And he's a wonderful, wonderful man. And he had lost his son to a terrible traffic accident after he had gone through Vietnam and survived that. Anyway, I sent it to him, and I got a call the next morning at about 6 o'clock, and he'd been up all night and he'd finished the book and he read the whole book. And he said it was so important for people to know that that this is what happens when soldiers come home now. And because he stressed there was no decompression. He said even after the Vietnam, usually came back and you had a month or so of decompression or a few months, but with Vietnam, there was not much. And as you know, the soldiers came out on the street and were received very sometimes negatively. But he pointed out that his ancestors and after World War II, they were all on a big ship coming home. They were together. They're having a few drinks. They're talking about stories, and they came home. And there was this positive feeling when they came back to the soil, and then they rejoined their lives. And he said, "There's nothing like that now with in the military." And he was right, because Andrew was his second tour in Iraq, and he came home, and he only had about 4 more months to serve, or 6 months or so before. And he was all up on the adrenaline high of being over there. It was very hard for him to come back here and just do this boring stuff on the base. And he was kind of pushing the envelope a little bit, driving down to Mexico and coming back at 5 o'clock in the morning and doing these things. And I just think it was because he was, used to being shot at and seeing people blown up and picking up body parts. And he comes back and he's supposed to just behave like nothing had happened. So I can't remember exactly what your question was for that. Oh, the Marine family has been really wonderful. And I had a Marine, older Marine, who knew some people in the Navy, and they tried to help me find Andrew, but there really was nothing the military could do. We were trying to find out where he'd been getting his ATM disability checks, but they told us that he's doing all right, that he's a survivalist, he's been well trained in how to survive, and that that he was fairly healthy and maintaining himself. So the Marine family. And then I'll have to tell you one other thing. A great friend of his, Nick, in high school, was a mentor to him, and they were running cross country. Andrew did really well in the Marines, partially because he was really good at running cross country. And when he got to Paris Island, as you know, it was pretty tough. And he'd be sending me these quick letters. He said, "Dad, we had to run 10 miles, then they wouldn't let us sleep all night. Then we got up the next day, we're crawling under barbed wire, people shooting at us and everything. I finished third, and everyone's really upset and worn out. And he said, but tell the truth, Dad, I love it." So, he liked all that, the activity of it. But his mentor, a year or two older in high school, Nick, became a sniper in the Marines, and Andrew knew it very well. And then Nick went over there and was killed by enemy fire. So that was even before Andrew went to Iraq. Mm-hmm. So the Marine family is something that's just, it's really, really amazing. Mm-hmm. And wonderful to I feel flattered to be included in it as a Marine dad.
I always did too, and humbled, because I had my story and I'd written a couple of books as an author and so forth and so on. And then you would meet someone at a at a meeting of Gold Star moms who had lost sons and so forth and so on. And most of the time I just spent in kind of humble silence of being in their presence and their strength, which is kind of how I feel interviewing you here. As I said at the beginning, this kind of survivor's guilt of the fact that we share up to that point of coming home. And then, you've had this incredible journey. Let me take a minute to delve into something else here. You've got these other books, Racing My Father, Flying Change, and so on. Your life has been so interesting. For a few minutes, let's talk about you just as a writer and this connection with horse racing. It's crazy. I mean, it's sort of like going to the dark side of the moon now or something like, okay, we're in the middle of this. Now I'm changing the subject radically, but you're more than the author of this book. You have a history as an author and as a human. Talk about your family, talk about your other writing, but just talk about who you are. Me, when we're done this interview, I'll be picking up a grandchild at school, my youngest granddaughter, Nora, who's 9. That's who I am. Bottom line. Talk to me about yourself and your other writing and whatever else you want to say, because I want to round the picture out here. When you read your biographical material, you've had such a rich and interesting life. I want people to get an understanding of who the person is who has written this incredible book. You're more than this story. Talk to me about that.
Well, I grew up as the son of A.P. Patty Smithwick, who is a legendary steeplechase jockey, the best one in the country ever, and is in the Hall of Fame. And my uncle was an incredible horse trainer of Thoroughbreds, and he's in the Hall of Fame also. So, and I was brought up in a very, very hardworking family where was from the age of about 14 on. I would gallop horses at the racetrack before high school, and then I worked my way through Johns Hopkins, galloping horses at Pimlico at 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock in the morning. Then I'd go to take my classes at Hopkins. And so I had a very much of an outdoors physical upbringing. And then when I was young, I wanted to follow my father's footsteps and be a jockey and live on the cutting edge. And it's extremely dangerous. And he ended his 20-year career with a horrible fall. It was probably the most traumatic thing I'd lived through at that time, where he was paralyzed for quite a while, and the doctors thought he wouldn't even live through it. And at the exact same time, when I was 14, my mother had a bad fall off a horse, and she had a broken leg, and I was kind of like a homeless kid up at Belmont Park, and this wonderful African-American Cherokee, Speedy Cannell, took care of me. And he was kind of like a horse whisperer, and he was a really good boxer, and he sang with Marvin Gaye. And so I was brought up in this wonderful group of uncles all around me on the racetrack. And it was a little bit racy too on the racetrack with the lifestyle. So what I'm trying to say is that then I became torn between, do I want to do that lifestyle or do I want to be a writer? And then finally, what I figured out in my education, it seemed like you always had to be one thing. And then finally I got to be a certain age, and I thought, well, I can bring these things together. And so that's what I've tried to do. And my racing trilogy is really about people and experiences, and horses are in the background, but the people are the main things. And there are some very important horses who I knew extremely well and loved, and that's for sure. The first book is Racing My Father. It's all about my love for my father, and he died at a young age, about being the son. And then the second book is me going back to racing at the age of 50 and being the father and having my children and dealing with them and knowing that I'm participating in this very dangerous sport. And then the third one is all about male camaraderie with 3 of my greatest friends who happen to be very high up in the horse racing business. And it's a celebration of their lives, but they all died within a few months with each other, and I gave the eulogy at each of their lives. So it's all about my love, especially for my best friend of my life, Tom Voss, V-O-S-S. So that was a very extremely difficult book to write, and I was writing that book all about grief and how to deal with grief when we were living through these experiences with Andrew. So I tend to tackle these tough subjects, and I just think, what the hell? And next thing I know, I'm tackling a very tough subject. And this book on Andrew at first, so my wife and I went to Orlando at first. We heard he was there, and I came back and I sort of took some notes on the way back in the airplane. And then I got up in the morning at 5 o'clock, like I used to go gallop horses, but I got up before going to teach. I thought I better write some of this down while it's raw. So then we went on these trips all over the country to San Diego and cities, Santa Fe and Seattle and Orlando and these different cities. I would take notes and I would get back here and I'd just try to get the raw material out however I could. And it was extremely painful to do. Then I had all that raw material and tried to shape it into a memoir that had a purpose to it, which is that Andrew is kind of a microcosm, and our plight's a microcosm that's happening to 60,000 people across the country at this moment right now. So, and I love writing and I love teaching them. And I hear from many of my past students, and it's the most fulfilling thing in the world. I go back and forth. Both things are so fulfilling when I hear from someone that's read one of my books and is moved by it, and that happens to me. And then when I hear back from a student who's doing really well now and says, come on, let's go for lunch, I just can hardly believe it. So I feel very lucky and fulfilled in these two career paths. And also I loved riding and being out of doors, and I love many sports. And I raised my kids, Andrew and Patty and Eliza, to ski, to canoe. You're looking at my canoe paddles a minute ago. That's Andrew's, and we were always camping, canoeing, skiing, riding, running, and so I've tried to integrate these interests and these passions of mine. And one of my main themes of the books, now I think of it, is my love for my wife, Ansley, who, if it wasn't for her, I probably would have gone down some different path. And she's the strongest woman and the most wonderful woman I know. And there's a love story in Racing My Father, where basically the long short of it is I sat down, had a cup of coffee with her when I was in graduate school, and I never left. We've been together. It was love at first sight. And we've been together ever since that moment. So I'm a lucky man.
If someone is approaching you backwards the way I have, starting with Wars Over, Come Home, and you wanted to hand them another book and say, okay, this is a good path into understanding me and my writing, would it be Racing My Father? Would that be a good place to begin, or should we jump the gun and jump in on another point? I know people listening to this are going to want to get to know you better. Give us a pointer here.
I think that would be interesting because much of this book is about Andrew's youth and what he was like. And in Racing My Father, you can see my youth and my upbringing. And I tried to continue the really good things about that in the way I brought up my children. And especially my mother was a wonderful mother and that always was extremely involved with us. So Racing My Father would be a good place to start. And then actually, Andrew's in quite a bit of flying change because that's when I was a father, and he was very nervous about me riding in the races. He was our most social son and our most cuddly child. He loved being at home. He loved being safe and going on trips with the family. And he wasn't quite sure what the heck I was doing, getting on these horses and going out and, galloping across country and seeing. At that time when I did that, some other people had some really bad falls. And then Andrew's also in Racing Time, he comes in because that was just when we started. That was when Racing Time takes place when Andrew was in Iraq. And I happened to be working for Dickie Small, who was a Vietnam hero. And Dickie and I often discussed warfare and the war. And Dickie tried to keep me calm about that Andrew would be all right.
There are plenty of pictures of Andrew here in the book at various stages of his life. And I know you've got some pictures circulating out there of him that people might want to take a look at. Shall I find one here and put it up for folks to look at in case somebody who's listening to this happens to see him someplace in a part of the world he might be? Or do you have something handy that you could show us there? Because I have all these pictures of him in the book at various stages of his life. I don't know if there's one that's sort of closer to the last time you saw him. Is this the kind of thing we're talking about?
Oh, that's his brother Patty.
That's the brother, but do you have
Yeah.
one like that where we just get a portrait of him more like he is? Because the ones I have of him in here are
Well, not
like him on a bicycle,
yeah.
fuzzy,
You don't have-
taken more from a distance.
Yes, they're mostly from a distance due to the.
I know, and I was just wondering if I had missed something because I see the one of his brother here, and I wanted.
Here's a favorite picture, a more positive one. Look, that's us.
Yeah.
We're getting ready to go ride together.
Yeah,
we're-
I just turned to that myself here, but I didn't know. I think the
Yeah.
ones on the bike with all the load of stuff there is hard to identify.
Yeah, that's because it's from a video and it's.
That's
just
what I'm
from-
talking about. Yeah, I was
Yeah.
looking for anything else that was a little more,
No,
a little
no,
easier to
that's
see.
all we have, and he
Okay.
changed it. He has a beard and a ponytail now.
Yeah,
We just learned that.
be hard to see.
But
So-
thank you for asking.
Yeah, let me wrap up by saying we are going to link to everything. How would you like people to follow you, get in touch with you? We're going to put all these links up so we don't have to spell anything out. I'm just asking. Ernie will be contacting you and getting everything when we're done here. But I'm asking you.
My daughter Eliza is my social media czar. But
Right.
I have a website, patricksmithick.com.
Yeah.
And the books are available on, on Amazon and in bookstores.
Yeah.
And the patricksmithick.com has ways of finding me when you go to that website, and it has
Good.
information about the book. And then links, my daughter Eliza can send you any links. We're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, and and now we're also on Twitter. I just learned.
We'll put it everywhere because we will put this everywhere. We're on we are on all sorts of things, and Ernie can tell you the podcast is on sort of 5 different places, and then YouTube, and then Facebook Live, and then Facebook recorded, and all the rest. This is my advanced copy. Sorry about the glare on the cover.
I have to tell you, my daughter Eliza took that picture on the cover, and that was when she went to meet Andrew in San Francisco, and they had a picnic they walked across part of the Golden Gate Bridge, and they were out on the sand dunes at sunset. So she that's a photograph she loves, and that she took, and she has been extremely helpful putting this whole book together.
That's a good picture. This is with a little less glare on it. I'm just trying to, there you are. That's angled better.
That was a good day, and they were just having a peaceful time, and that's the Pacific Ocean in the background.
That's a lovely picture.
Yeah.
And I thank you for this time. I hope that plenty of people pay attention to the book, and when Ernie, our producer, posts this, please use it any way you can. And if you have anything you want to update us on, get back in touch. We can talk some more. And please say hi to Eliza and anybody else you're working with on this for us.
Well, thank you very much for being on the show. I really appreciate your intensity and your having read the book and understanding it. And I never knew that I was going to that you and I shared so many themes in our lives, with our sons both being in the military.
Yeah, we do. And
what's your son's name?
John. And he, when he left the Marine Corps, he was a sergeant. He was in signals intel, and he was based out of Bagram, and he would get in helicopters and fly up into the Hindu Kush and look for bin Laden and do crazy things. But he doesn't do any Marine stuff now. It's kind of been there, done that. And he's not sort of gung-ho wanting to just sort of relive all that. He has his honorable discharge on the wall, and his kids know he was in the Marine Corps, but basically, it was a hard, real experience for him. And he's been okay. But put it this way, as a family, we totally get this.
Right.
So you're talking to a brother here.
Well, thank you, Frank. And I enjoy having a brother.
Yeah, and I want to finish this in an untypical way. My faith goes up and down. I'm going to add Andrew to my family in the mornings. Jeannie, Jessica, Francis, and John, Amanda, Ben, Donnie, Claire, people who are married into our family. And I will finish this prayer every morning, and Andrew. Much love, brother.
All right. Thank you very much.
Take care and blessings on you and your family.
All right. Thank you. Have a good rest of the day.
You too.